now. So good morning. Thanks to all of you for joining this webinar today. I'd like to start with a quick word about Future State. We are a small team with big ambition to help equip policymakers with the knowledge and resources so that the digital age benefits the world's poor and strengthens, rather than undermines, open societies. We believe this requires a relentless focus on developing policies and technologies that empower people to benefit from the data they are increasingly producing online. We believe this is an especially important opportunity as we approach the milestone of half the world's population having access to the internet. Like our experience in the US and other advanced economies, the next waves of people to come online will be data rich before they are economically healthy. And yet, despite this opportunity, the world is really struggling to govern data. The challenge, of course, is to reduce abuses of all kinds, enhance accountability and improve ethical standards, while also ensuring that the maximum public and private value can also be derived from data. That's why we are particularly excited about the 4 innovators who will be presenting to us this morning. All of them and their colleagues are working to build systems and tools that will make data portability not just a conceptual right, but a practical way to unlock data so that individuals have more control over how and by whom it is used in ways that both protect privacy and civil liberties, but also expand the benefits of data-driven innovation. This is the first in a series of dialogues we are organizing on data governance approaches that empower people. We welcome all of you to the community and look forward to your feedback and partnership. A word on logistics. We have 4 presenters on 3 different continents. So we are going from east to west in order to be respectful of time differences. Each presenter will have about 15 minutes to give an overview of the solution his team is designing. And then we'll take questions from the audience after the presentations. So without further ado, I am delighted to introduce my good friends and both technology visionaries in their own right, Pramod Varma and Siddharth Shetty, who are joining from Bangalore. Pramod and Siddharth work on the design of India's digital public goods, a set of open APIs collectively known as the India Stack. And Pramod and Siddharth are going to talk with us about India's emerging data empowerment and protection architecture. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Siddharth to describe DEEPA for us.
Thank you so much, Kay. Hey everyone, I'm Siddharth Shetty, a volunteer at the iSpirit Foundation. So over the past, as you all know, India is a country with a population of over 1 billion plus people, largely consists of an informal economy. So less than 3% of the population even pays income tax. A significant number of our population is poor, so over 70% of them live under less than $2 US a day. It's extremely diverse, so you have a huge number of languages being spoken. Each state has their own language, different cultures, different dialects, and you have a huge portability or migration of the population state to state. So around 400 million migrants, and hence portability of government services and the like become very critical. And in light of this, for the past 10 years, a bunch of us have been thinking about if we have to go about solving for financial and health inclusion and taking a 30-year view of these 2 problems, what are the core building blocks that must be in place that would make this happen? And just like in the physical world, governments built interoperable highways and railroads that allowed flourishing of commerce and other activities. On top of them, in the digital world, what would be those public goods or public platforms that, if built, would allow a flourishing, or as we call it, a Cambrian explosion of companies on top that could then go ahead and solve for financial and health inclusion. And so all of this started off with an open API known as Aadhaar. And so Aadhaar is India's national digital ID platform. Over 1 billion Indians have been enrolled into Aadhaar, and that means over 1 billion Indians can now digitally authenticate themselves and prove their identity in a low-cost, trustful, and secure manner. Given that this has been built as an open API, you could use this for a range of use cases. So I could actually digitally authenticate myself to open a bank account, get access to a mutual fund, get access, digitally authenticate myself to get access to a loan or any other such use case. And hence, on top of the Aadhaar ID platform, you've got two open APIs that are further created, one known as eKYC, which riding on top of Aadhaar authentication allows you to authenticate and digitally share your KYC information in a secure manner with any service provider. So for example, in India today, you can actually go to a telecom company, digitally authenticate and share your KYC data and get access to a SIM card that's activated in 5 minutes flat. And that's what a major telecom company used to scale up to 160 million subscribers in a similar number of days. But again, given that it's built out as an open API, which means it's really pluggable with any use case, the same public platform is being used by mutual fund companies to open up mutual fund accounts. It's being used by banks to open up bank accounts. And today, over 99% of Indian households have access to a bank account. It's being used by other parts of the economy to bring about a sense of formalization. You have in a similar vein, there is an open API that's been built out called eSign, which allows you to authenticate against your Aadhaar identity and digitally sign any document, and that's legally recognized in a court of law under India's Information Technology Act. And that means people can now, in a paperless manner, digitally sign contracts, documents, loan agreements, and the like. And all of this being done on a smartphone, for example. And so therefore, this is while a much more secure, trusted, but also far more low-cost way for people to access formal services. Along the way, what we realized that's critical for financial inclusions is payments, and payments must be a public good. And that led to the creation of the platform known as UPI, or Unified Payments Interface. Last month, UPI crossed about 670 million transactions. Over ₹1 trillion went through that payment system, making one of the world's fastest growing payment systems. Essentially, in real time, any Indian today can transfer money from one bank account to another bank account on an application of their choice. And so a lot of consumer application companies today now offer payments as a feature because of the way UPI has been designed, which is essentially you have the public good, which is the payment switch. You have a layer of banks that plug in on top through a set of standardized APIs. And then you have internet companies plugging in on top of banks that design consumer experiences, given the diversity of India, on top of the resilient banking system and drive distribution. And so that's hugely successful because consumers now have choice, because they can go to an app that serves their needs the best and make payments. Again, given these are completely real-time and low-cost payments, a lot of India actually purchases products in sachets. And if you look in the physical world, the success of FMCG companies happened when they sachetize their products in India. So while in the West, if you go to a departmental store, you'd actually purchase really large bottles of shampoo and massive rolls of tissue paper and other such services. In India, actually, the success happened because they sachetized it. Like for ₹1, you could purchase a small packet of shampoo. Or for ₹1, you could purchase a small packet of shaving cream. And that allowed far more market penetration. And therefore, it was critical that India has a payment system that allows for these low-cost transactions to take place by market participants. And along the way, what we realized was with the adoption of these digital platforms, as well as connectivity permeating in India. So 300 plus million Indians have a smartphone, 700 million have a feature phone. We notice Indians becoming data rich. And therefore, the hypothesis was, if Indians are becoming data rich, could data be used to establish trust and actually make them economically wealthier? Because unlike in the West, where when they became data rich, like countries like USA and UK, given that these citizens were already economically well off and had large amounts of discretionary income, data was used to actually shape the spending patterns. And that was a very powerful business model, which is why you see advertisement-driven companies as one of the largest companies out there. But while some of these same set of companies have the largest user base in India, the revenue that they draw from here is fiddly, largely because a lot of Indians don't have the money to spend. We have so far been a credit-starved nation. So of 1+ billion citizens, only about 150 million of them have any sort of presence in a credit bureau, and only 30 million of them actually have a thick file in a credit bureau. And while that's the case for individuals, it's equally bad for our small and medium-sized enterprises. So of the 12 million businesses registered in the national taxation system known as GST, 8 million of them pay tax every month, but only about 1.5 million of them have ever had access to formal credit. And therefore, a big driver for financial inclusion is, can we actually democratize access to credit, which means given India's diversity, you've got to have the ability to use data to create diverse models of risk and other such understanding. And hence we started work on what's known as the consent framework. So for us, we said, if India needs to deliver financial inclusion, given that we're becoming data rich, how do we give users control of their data? And so the way control is manifested is through consent, right? And just like money can't leave your account without your permission, in the new paradigm, data won't be shared without your permission or your consent. So as we thought about how do we give Indians control of their data, we arrived at one has to look at this from 3 perspectives. One is from a technical framework point of view, which is how would consent and the consent framework look like, and what would be the technical flows through which consent and data transfer would take place. Second is what's the institutional architecture through which this would happen. Because as I mentioned, India is a population of over 1 billion+ people. And so you need a diverse set of market participants that go about managing consent and serving this diverse set of users. You cannot just create one portal or application or a government application and ask every Indian to use that. And third is, what are the necessary policy and legal frameworks that must be put in place that not only protect data from misuse and protect the individual, but also allow for empowerment where the user is in control of their data and they can choose with whom and when they want to share it. And so all of these 3 put together is what's known as the data empowerment and protection architecture. The first piece of it, which is the technology, is essentially what we call electronic data consent. Now, what we did is, given that consent's a very abstract term, we codified it into a standardized set of attributes, right? And this became a national standard in 2016. Essentially, what you're seeing on your screen is a machine-readable codified version of electronic consent. So it contains a bunch of information related to who are the different parties involved in a data sharing transaction, a bunch of information related to the data itself, what data I want to share with whom, for what time period, can I revoke it or not, and then a bunch of information related to audit logs and the purpose for which you're sharing data. And every consent artifact is digitally signed, which ensures integrity of the artifact as well as non-reputability. And this has been designed on a set of principles we call organs. So O stands for open standard. And so the consent artifact is an open standard that can be adopted by anyone. R in organs is revocable. So a user could give consent to share their data every month for the next 6 months, and then go ahead and actually revoke it if they feel like. G is the consent artifact itself is very granular. So I could actually give you consent to only a particular row and column of my transaction statement. or I could give you consent to only the output of a query. Let's say all you wanted to know was, do I have a minimum balance greater than 10,000 in my bank account? I could consent to only share the output of that query instead of my entire transaction statement. A is it's auditable, and so structured audit logs are generated every time consent's created, data is shared, and so on and so forth. N is notice. So just like when money leaves your bank account, you get notified through messaging and email. Similarly, in the new paradigm, when data is shared, you will be notified through messaging, email, and other endpoints that your consent's been created, your data has been shared with this consumer, and so on and so forth. And S is the entire consent, like I said, is structured and it's also secure. And so the entire data flow is end-to-end encrypted so that it goes only from the provider and can only be decrypted by the end consumer, which may be the individual customer or the entity that's consuming the data. This consent artifact was what was adopted first by the 4 financial sector regulators in 2016. So the Reserve Bank of India, India's central bank, which looks at the banking sector, SEBI, which is the securities regulator in India, which looks at all securities, stock exchanges, mutual funds, and the like. PFRDA, which looks at pension funds, and IRDA, which looks at insurance. These 4 regulators collectively came together, adopted the consent architecture, and created an institutional layer around it, known as account aggregators. Now, account aggregators are essentially a manifestation of what we call data access fiduciaries, and it's a manifestation of them in the financial domain, and we expect other types of data access fiduciaries in telecom and healthcare to come up as well. Essentially, the way it works is you've got financial information providers on one end, which is where customer data resides. You've got financial information users on the other end, essentially those that want access to customers' data in order to give them a service of a loan, wealth management, robo-advisory, etc. And you've got the user in the middle, which may be an individual or a company that has data. And so the user can now register with account aggregators. These are regulated by India's central bank, and hence that ensures appropriate protection and interoperability and enforceability of a lot of these policies. And as things stand, about 5 account aggregators are out in the market today. Once the user registers with an account aggregator of his choice, he can actually then link his accounts with each of those providers. And that may be a bank, a mutual fund, an insurance, a tax platform, etc. And the APIs have already been standardized. And so therefore, what are the interfaces as well as the data that's being exposed by each financial information provider standardized? The APIs of the account aggregator on both ends are standardized, and the API on the financial information user's end is also standardized to ensure interoperability. Once the user links his account with the respective financial information providers, he can actually then consent to either receive a copy of his data at a particular time interval that's downloaded and stored and then gets decrypted in his trusted client of his smartphone application, or he may consent to share that data with a set of financial information users in real time to gain access to a loan or other such service. The entire data flow is end-to-end encrypted, like I said. So the financial information provider, when it receives the consent artifact, fetches the data, digitally signs it, then encrypts it and sends it back. And so only the rightful recipient can decrypt that data. And there's a machine-readable registry of all of these actors to ensure interoperability and trust within the system. And the same framework has now been adopted also for urban data as well as telecom data in India. And from a policy perspective, from a regulatory perspective, India's draft data protection bill strongly aligns with this approach because consent is the bedrock of that bill. So largely unconsented flows of data have been made illegal. And second is the draft data protection bill enshrines a right to data portability. which means any data principal has a right to port their data from one service provider to another. And the account aggregator is nothing but an entity that facilitates that. And like I said, there'll be a market ecosystem of account aggregators catering to a diverse set of users' needs, because given India's diversity, what's informed consent to you and me would be very different from an informed consent to someone in a tier 2 or tier 3 city in India. And so that marketplace of actors is extremely important. So that's a brief overview of India's data empowerment and protection architecture. To summarize, while it has a technological underpinning based on consent and standardized open APIs, both on the provider's end as well as the data access fiduciary's end and the consumer of data's end, it's also critical to think through the institutional elements of who would be running the account aggregators and how do you ensure it's competitive and you have a diverse set. In India, that's regulated by the RBI, and so they've been looking and deeply thinking about a lot of these aspects. And the third is, of course, what are the right legal and regulatory layers that ensure consumers remain protected, their data cannot be misused. At the same time, they're empowered with the ability to access and port their data in real time to access financial and other services that are socioeconomically important to them. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, so next up we have Julian Ranger, the co-founder of DigiMe. I'm very excited to have Julian follow the DEPA presentation because I'd really like to understand similarities and differences between what the Indian data empowerment and protection architecture aims to do versus what the commercial venture that Julian has co-founded and designed called DigiMe attempts to do. So without anything else, Julian, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you. Can I just check that you can A, hear me, and B, see the slides?
Yes and yes.
Excellent. And I would hate to think with that introduction that it's a commercial versus what's happening in India. In fact, what we're doing is exactly in lockstep with what India are doing, and it's a cooperative thing. So I don't see, and I hope nobody else does, that the two things are, in that case, different, they're additive. So with that said, I'll dive into what we're doing. And it's really about doing more with data, but doing it privately and securely. And if we look within Europe, where we're based, although we have operations around the world, GDPR has driven a lot of the discussion. But this discussion is very similar in very many parts of the world. And people are quite familiar now, certainly in the UK and in other parts of Europe, about GDPR because it was all about privacy, protection, and we all got lots of emails saying, will we reconsent to marketing messages or reconsent to cookies? And of course, not a lot of people did, so there's been reductions in the activity as a consequence. And many people would say that's what we should expect, a restriction of the market, but now under our control, under individual control, deciding what we want so we get what we want with privacy and security. And so it doesn't seem in conflict, but actually I would say it is in conflict with what we as individuals want and what society needs. Because whilst we must restore privacy and control, we actually have to realize that we need to share more data, not less. So just as India points out that data rich and the economic benefits that will come if they can share that data, that applies all around the world to everybody. We have to find a new model that allows us to share more, but with privacy and security. And a simple use case for that is thinking about personalized medicine and personalized health. If we're going to do that, we need to share our health history from when we were born, maybe wearables with heart rate and temperature, etc., maybe genomics, maybe the food we eat and buy, maybe even our social data, so our mental state can be taken into account at any one time. So the question is, how do we do more? So in other words, where we are today, there's two prevailing themes, if you like, narratives. One is privacy, security, and consent. And so we have the legislation. But the other is there's an inequitable value exchange. Other people are making more value out of my data than I am. And that leads to giving back control, but that leads to reduced sharing. And actually, that's a very bad message. Nobody wants to go from a large GDP to a lower GDP. No one wants to go backwards in terms of the capabilities that we're doing. And actually, what has happened is that we've forgotten that there is this requirement to share more. And we need to look at today's architecture with lots of companies out there, lots of stovepipes of data, and say, how do we end up bringing that data together, but in a way where it's not being done by tracking behind our back privacy and security? Because the current architecture can't do it. If you take today's architecture and say to people who are dealing with personalized medicine or smart cities or IoT or new fintechs or looking after or enabling people with low credit to get credit, any of those things, you'll hear from people that they want what we would call rich data with 5 characteristics. Single source, so we don't have to worry about correlation effects. Wide across data categories, so we can do the new things. Deep in time, accurate, and also preferably a thing called normalized, which means putting it all into a single form. So a consuming entity doesn't necessarily have to know everything about the oddities of where the data came from. Our current architecture doesn't support that. And in fact, it's very questionable whether any one company could bring all of the data about an individual together, even if we ignored privacy and security. But what we do know is that there is one person in the whole system that knows about me, Julian, and one person that knows about each of you who are listening. And that, of course, is ourselves. We can bring all the data together. Only I know every doctor I've been to in hospital, wearables I'm doing, the bank accounts I've got, the education I did, where I buy food, etc., etc. So if we can bring the data together at the individual, change the architecture, in other words, then we can end up with privacy, security, and consent, and we can end up doing more, increasing the capability, GDP of every nation, increasing the value so that everybody benefits. And that's what this is all about. That is what DigiMe is about. And it applies whether you're in a developed nation, developing, whether you're a refugee, dispossessed, whatever it may be. It will democratize data, so it also means that any individual can create a new company using the best data, irrespective of whether a big company can do it too. It's all down to whether an individual will share that data with you. And it allows everybody then to share in value. And I use the phrase value rather than money because value might be a service, it might be convenience, or it might be reward. So this isn't about a choice between personal data rights or innovation, or between privacy and security or innovation, but it's about rights and privacy and security and innovation and greater value to all, whether that all is individuals, businesses, governments, and society as a whole. Now that sounds like a perfect nirvana. How could it possibly happen? Well, that's what we have built and are working on. And so it's all about making sure that the individual has the data, and then all the individuals together create effectively the data grid. So how does it work? Well, we all know how email works. I might download a product like Outlook. I will authenticate, as you can see on the left-hand side here, my various different email sources, and all my data comes back down to me. and Microsoft, as the providers of Outlook, don't get to see, touch, or hold any of my data. And now I've got my data, I can share it. I can share my emails with other people if I want to. So DigiMe is very much the same. With DigiMe, you download a copy of DigiMe to whatever device you've got. That's Mac, PC, Android, iOS, and in fact, a web-only version. You connect it to your data sources. You authenticate only once. Every day, your DigiMe gets your data, and you choose to put it wherever you want. So at the moment, that can be anything of Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox, and others are coming along. So you end up with a 100% private library, a full copy of all of your data from all of these sources that's fully secured with only your encryption. And DigiMe, the company, doesn't see, touch, or hold data ever. And then you have the ability, using the consent architecture that is built in, and like was explained for India, that includes an electronic consent in a standardized format, etc., that anybody can now ask you for data. So you effectively create a data grid and a decentralized, because everybody has their own data. So you simply download our app, choose where you want to see or store your library, then connect any sources. And we're already live with social, financial, medical, wearables, music, and other data. And that includes the world's first patient-facing API in Iceland. It includes the UK NHS. It includes very many of the US health services like Epic and Cerner, Blue Button, and CDA. It includes, we're just about to add some European, some Australian, and some other health sources over time, as well as other pieces. I'll skip over that. So let's have a look at a quick video, slightly older UI version, but shows you what's happening. So you basically start by choosing where you want to store your data so that you control it. Say nobody else gets it. It's untouchable by anybody else. It's all fully encrypted. Go from there. You authenticate your various sources and your data comes down. No other activity is required. It's very, very simple. You can see all of your data in a long timeline. You can do a search on any item at any time. All of this, by the way, is available today. This is real operational software. It's not a design. It's taken over 7 years to get all fully built and done to this level. And you can search for any of your data, and you'll see right at the end, as we're coming up to this, that you can then actually give consent to another app or web service to ask for your data. And that should be coming up any moment after the Icelandic health there. Here we go. So there's another app here. This particular app is looking to do some social analytics. So it's asking for your data. It uses a full consent certificate, which I'll come back to. And if you say yes, then your data is extracted by your DigiMe and put into that app. Again, the company doesn't see, touch, or hold the data. And there you can see the app got your data. And in fact, because in this example, the data didn't leave your phone, it's fully private. And in fact, as we go forwards in life, there'll be more processing brought to your data rather than your data to processing, which is better, in fact, for businesses because they don't have the risk and cost of holding your data. Better for you because your data isn't being promulgated all around the world. So there's a number of core challenges that need to be solved to do that. How to collect all the data and do it, how to normalize all that data, which is based upon actually my previous career doing that in the military and stuff, and then how to consent and move that data, and those have been done. If we look at consent access, there's a lot of discussion about whether or not it is possible to give explicit and informed consent. And the answer is it is, but it's not a choice of just give me your data or read 20 pages. It's a layered consent. And we work very hard to work out what are the main things that need to be displayed so that people can give informed consent. 6 key questions: what data do they want in detail? What is going to be done with your data and what are you going to get back? Will data leave your device? Will it be shared with third parties? And if so, who and why? and will there be right to forget? And so that's all very clear on the certificate. It's done using international standards as well that we've helped develop. So there's a consent receipt international standard, much like the one that India is currently using. I'm going to show you now an app that uses this consent receipt to pull data. This was produced literally in about 5 to 6 days of effort, because when all the data is there, it's very easy for people to produce new capabilities. So the app has used the SDKs, which are available across iOS, Android, and web, has asked for data. If the individual said yes, then all of that data goes across. And this app, without taking any data off your phone, can give you a full insight to all of your different bank accounts and information. And as I said, was produced literally in 5 days of effort, because all that the app developer had to do here was process the data. They didn't have to go and get it, didn't have to normalize it or anything like that. So it enables more rapid innovation. In this particular case, as this particular video, we're just talking finance, but you could merge data from different streams, do whatever you want to do with it. People also say, will individuals manage their data? To which my response is no, they won't. Nobody wants to manage data. In fact, it's unlikely that people want manage their finances very well. It has to be made very easy. And so we've put a lot of effort over the years about usability. You've seen that in the app there. We look and strive for over 70% on usability tests with random people around the world, and we get that. But the key answer here is, can you make it so that it's as easy as authenticate once, your data comes down, you have full control, clear consent, and if you can make it that easy, which we believe we have, then this architectural change to the individual holding their data opens everything else up. We are a business. Businesses have to make money, but that doesn't mean to say that it has to be expensive. It doesn't mean to say that the balance of money goes more to the business, to the individual. So we made a decision right up front that we would aim to take less than 1% of the economic value of data, acting as the data grid. And so we don't charge the user anything. We don't see their data. We're literally a postman. And when a business asks for data, they pay 10 cents. And there are caps so that if it's a charity or somebody gets less than that, they pay a lot less. And the idea behind that is we will be profitable, but we're just a postal service, a data grid, and all the remaining value is split between businesses and individuals in whatever way the market takes it as individuals want. There are, across finance, across health, there are enormous benefits when the individual has the data. They have all of that rich data in one place and can share it. Health is a particular interesting one. There's some apps on the right-hand side that have already been available. You can move to a whole new form of patient centricity, which overcomes an enormous amount of problems in all of our healthcare, whether that's, again, developing or developed nations. You've always got your data with you, reduces mistakes, increases awareness, allows you to use health apps with your rich data. It means that you can move and your data moves with you. It allows research to get really deep data, not just a scan, but a scan your medical history. If you look on the web now, there's quite a lot about patient centricity that has been spawned from this type of thing. This table and these presentations will be available afterwards, I understand. You can look through it. There is a whole change to health across all sorts of different nations coming when the individual can now be part of that whole system. And we're already working with quite a lot of people to do that. So what's it required to make it work in any nation? And actually, not much. You don't even need the full laws of GDPR or whatever else. If all you have is a requirement for data portability, preferably with a well-formed API. Actually, this is an old presentation, so I don't quite know why that's, sorry, that was there. Old slide, Paul, sorry about that. If you specify with a well-formed API, then you will have all that you need to make what I've just said work. Now, there are things that would be useful on top of that, which is an ISO standard trust framework so that companies can show that they are trustworthy with your data. Explicit and informed consent is a good bar to have. Data minimization is a good bar. But for any nation, just having data portability law is all that is needed. Often talked about standards. Should we insist upon interoperability standards for the data? Well, I spent 20 years as a standards person, so you'd probably think I'd say yes. They definitely reduce the problem set, but actually standards for various reasons never fully solve the interoperability problem. And you have to bring that into nodes such as DigiMe and such as the other products you'll be hearing about downstream, which are the points where the maximum data flow is. So we do need standards, they will come, but if you have data portability today, then you enable this whole ecosystem to work immediately. So private sharing, it is here already today with DigiMe, and you're seeing that building, and there are others coming. We work, as I said, within the Indian environment, we work across Europe and US and Australia and others, and we work very hard to bring interoperability to work with other solutions such as those you're about to hear. So all of these things that I've put down on this slide at the front of the presentation are true and accurate, can happen today. We get rights to our data, we get privacy and security and consent as it happens. It enables innovation, it enables us to do more, and that is not just for individuals. Businesses can do more. Governments can now also share data, give data back, help people. And as a society, if we can do more with privacy, security, and consent, then that all works. And that's me finished. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, so up next we have John Bruce, who is in Boston right now. John is the CEO and a co-founder of InRuPt, which is a complement to the MIT open source software project known as Solid. Thanks so much, John. We're looking forward to learning more about InRuPt.
Thank you, and good day to you all. It's a pleasure having the opportunity to speak. I must tell you, I know maybe overrun, but I found the presentations from Pramod and Julian really interesting stuff. So I'll do my best to keep up with the theme here. And let me tell you that what I intended to do is rather than dwell on Solid per se, is to explain to you the philosophy behind Solid and InRuPt, if I may. And I promise you I'll keep it to 15 minutes or less. You know, the notion of, let's first talk about the notion of Solid, which is an open source project that it's been, the genesis was MIT. It's the result of many years of work on RDF, the semantic web, linked data, and the encapsulation of all of those technologies is embodied in Solid. And so Tim invented Solid about 5 years ago now, I guess. And there's been a bunch of work done over years to make it the platform it is today. And the reason it's being built is because the web, as Sir Tim originally envisioned it, we have yet to see. And what Solid represents, and the galvanizing agent of Solid is InRuPt, which is a company that Sir Tim and I founded about 18 months ago. The intent of it is to introduce a mid-course correction to the web. And I think it's right and proper we do so. And I know that a lot of this call today is about privacy and empowerment for the individual on the web. And I think that absolutely that's our intent here. But it's really important to stop just for a moment and consider why we might be able to make that happen. And the way we view it is that the web's composed of three huge constituencies. There's users like all the folks on this phone. And we are very constrained in our options, notwithstanding the implications for privacy. And leave it to the side just for a minute if I can, all the folks who are not on the web. Actually, as you might have noted, we're coming up to the 30th anniversary of the web, and an interesting fact is that just about 50% of the world's population is now considered to be on the web. and we're going to celebrate that with Tim in a couple of weeks. But anyway, back to the essence of what I was trying to say. Philosophically, we believe users like the folks on the phone here are very constrained. We have very limited choice. Our privacy is obviously, that's the essence of this webinar today. Our privacy is very suspect today. But even if that was true and singular and unique to us, there's only so much we can do as users, because we have an array of objections against change here. So then one must consider the second big constituency that exists on the web, and that's organizations who want to service us. They want to, sell us products or services, or they're a government agency. They want to deliver social services or whatever it happens to be. But big organizations, and I've traveled the world over to know this. As an aside, I'm also a certified privacy expert. So I've had occasion for many years to talk to folks about privacy. And generally, my conclusion is that the overwhelming majority of companies don't want data. And that might fly in the face of some public themes out there, but generally corporations would rather stick to their core competency of selling you a pair of shoes or whatever it is without being required to look after this, what they consider to be somewhat toxic stuff, which is considered your personal data. If they could work in a way that wouldn't require that, they'd be liberated, they'd be free to do other things. And then the third big constituency that comprises the web are developers, the glue that binds all this together. And developers today are seriously constrained. They're tutored into this mode of having to extract data from users, keep it safe and secure while they manipulate it, and then give you back a single resultant of manipulating that data. And that's hugely myopic. And if, like me, you've got 80 applications on your phone, you'll know that it's very constraining. I actually glue them all together when I consider these different applications and the implications to me as an individual. And a sort of halfway house, if one wants to step over these boundaries of these mini application silos of data, is to construct a scenario where the developer uses APIs to pull data from disparate places, mesh it together in some form or fashion, and give you a better result, and give you a more holistic view of it, you as an individual, give you a more innovative app. So here we have it. Users feel compromised, organizations want to be free of the obligations, and developers would much rather write applications that are not constrained by all of this. And that's what gives us the chance for change. So we believe a huge change is underway, and it's inevitable. And it will all be about data. And that's consistent with what Pramod and Julian have been describing. Data is going to drive pretty much the next evolution of the web. And not just data per se, not just access to the data, but control over the data. So philosophically, our view of what the world looks like is as follows. If you look at the web today, of course it's all centralized. Of course it is. Where the world we're used to living in, it implies that we will give our data to a single entity remotely. And I've picked on some of the usual suspects here. But we will give our data to agencies, and in return for which they'll give us some value back. And what that means, of course, is that we have no real control over our data. And see above notes, outside of this circle, or very modestly more, most organizations don't want this scenario, and developers are constrained by it too. So what Solid describes is a world that's different. It's a world where, and on this chart, on this slide here, you'll see that there are individuals, and that hexagonal shape there, that's a thing called a personal online data store. I will say as an aside, all of this is based on existing web standards. So it's all totally conformant with the web specs as exist today. What we're just trying to do, somebody said to me, you're trying to turn the web upside down. Answer, no, we're not. We're trying to turn it right side up. With a modest adjustment here or there, we can really get back to the web, or we can nudge the web back to the direction it should be on. An aside, back to the slide. So these hexagons represent a thing called a personal online data store. That's where all your data is going to reside. So it won't reside in remote silos. It will be local to you. It will be in your pod. And not just data that you generate, but devices, IoT devices pertinent to you will also infuse your pods. And as a consequence of which, When you've got all your data available to you, then application developers can build apps which assume that they don't need to entice you to give them data, nor do they need to engage with other third parties using APIs to pull data from their silos. It's a world where, because the data is under your control, you can grant access to it, to applications. And as you see here, it's a very simplistic view of it, but it's almost like using a browser. Actually, if you can use a browser, you can use this system. And the applications will render you value, and the value will assume access to a broad scope of your data, but based on the permissions you grant to individuals or apps, they can render it back to you. And the world changes quite significantly as a consequence. And of course, what it's doing here is it's universally inclusive. Aside from for the 50% of the population of the world that's on the web, any of them can use this system. And of course, the work that Sir Tim's doing with the foundation is trying to enable the balance of the world's population, to see what else we can do. More of that in a second when I talk about what InRuPt's doing. This is all user controlled. And of course, users have a different view of control. Some of it they want to keep, simplistic. I mean, while I might have a degree of granularity of interest and control over my data, my supposition is my 85-year-old mother will be less interested in that. So what we're building here is a UI which permissions in an appropriate way based on the individual use case. And it's totally flexible. Because it's based on web standards, now we can operate in a world that isn't constrained by requiring installation of new technologies. It basically says, this is open source. If you're out there and you're a developer and you want to build applications that can work on this system, knock yourself out. Actually, and since we're very, very young, I will tell you, we announced that InRuPt was going to be trying to galvanize this some 5 months ago. And since such time, when it comes to developers, we've had something like 400,000 developers come and spend time looking at the material we provided, and about 70,000 sign up for accounts. And by reckoning today, we think there's certainly more than 2,000 working on the system and helping it evolve and start to build apps. In parallel with which we're working with major organizations, and these are some of them. So we're working, I will tell you that there's a thing here that means the difference between a modest amount of intriguing success and global adoption. And it's a phenomenon called a network effect. And it says that, if you can induce change across those three constituencies, then you can just about pull it off. You can mobilize millions of people to change. And to kickstart that, we're working with some folks with huge web footprints. Actually, India is a fascinating place, and they're doing some phenomenal work. And we're working with a huge carrier in India to see if we can help galvanize change there. Entirely consistent with what Pramod and Deepa are doing with the Indian stack. At the same time, we have some major healthcare providers who are about to go to pilot. On digital identity, we had a successful pilot for refugees around the world, which was led by, I think, the biggest payment card processors there is in the world. And they did it as a project with global interest. This was for refugees to give them an ID and a way to become known as they traverse various geographies. And we as recently as this weekend made a submission with, is it public, I think, with MasterCard to do exactly the same for a mission that the World Bank's on for the 2 billion unbanked folks around the world, which we're very excited about doing. And then telecoms, we have a huge amount of interest, and we're, I think, about to go to proof of concept with a number of them, not just the folks in India, but we believe with folks in Germany and folks out of the UK, to see how we could make these pods available to their constituents and to create applications. We and others would create applications that could leverage the fact that now all the data resides in the control of the user, not remotely in these data silos. And And we think we can do things in a really, really innovative way. And of course, that's what's, in our mind, going to drive adoption. For all the concern there is about privacy, I think it's healthy as a concern. I think what's really going to mobilize change is freeing up the value of the data that exists in silos, put it in the hands of individual users, give them innovative apps that they couldn't possibly use today because they don't exist. And as a consequence of which that will drive adoption. One API, it's totally open source, and I think the time for change is here. So again, we're hopeful we can induce this mid-course correction on the web, and as a consequence of which, help change. I mean, it's entirely consistent with all of the things we all of us understand about GDPR and the various other privacy regs around the world. Wherein the user no longer needs to beg permission from the vendor to give them back their data or to delete their identity and so on. It says you don't no longer need to do that. It's all under your control. So fascinating times. Again, InRuPt is 5 months old. So while Sir Tim and I have been working on this for over a year, and he years before that in terms of technology, the business InRuPt, we announced ourselves 5 months ago, and we've been thrilled with the reception we've been getting. And I see a world where we and what's going on in India with Deeper and Promote and the Stack group, I see a very complementary world. I have yet to spend much time with the DigiMe folks, so it's great to hear Julian describe his business. But consistently now we've found a complementary way to help everybody in an aligned fashion. Big vendors, technology companies, organizations who want to service people, and developers in their tens of thousands. So I'm quite optimistic, actually, cautiously optimistic. We can induce change here for the better. Give people back privacy, give them value on their data, give them applications they couldn't possibly enjoy today, and to give those 50% of the world's population who don't have an existence on the web, to give them one. That's our mission right there. So anyway, I'm sure we'll come to questions later. So thank you for your time. I hope I was 15 minutes, so thank you for your time.
Exactly 15. That was perfect. Thanks so much, John. Listen, we're gonna move very quickly over to Greg Fair, who is in Mountain View and got up early to join us. Thank you, Greg. Greg is going to talk to us about a project that when I stumbled across it, I was actually a little surprised, to be honest. This is a Google-led consortium of some of the major tech companies. It's now called the Data Transfer Project, and it's really meant to build the tools and systems that help individuals or enable individuals to move their own data around between providers more seamlessly. And if we're very lucky, Greg will share with us the original name of the Data Transfer Project, which was, I think, a little bit more exciting. All right, Greg, are you online?
I will touch on that. Hi, everyone. John, nice to hear from you. Oh, great, and you stopped sharing so that I can share. I had a chance to meet John and Tim, I guess it was a month and a half ago, and we walked through Solid and InRuPt, and I'll talk a little bit about that too. Okay, let's see here. Can you see my screen right now?
Yes.
Okay, and do you see a full screen or do you see stuff with stuff on the side?
Full screen.
Okay, great. So you see agenda?
Yep.
Excellent. I will be brief. We don't have to run through all of it, but I did prepare enough to certainly cover the full 15 minutes. So my name is Greg Fair. I may or may not have with me today Jesse Chavez, who is a lead engineer on the Data Transfer Project out of Chicago. He was coming in and knew he'd come late, possibly.
I'm here.
Oh, hey, Jesse. We work on portability at Google. I want to tell you a little bit of what that means and kind of our background and how we approach the space, and then a little bit about the Data Transfer Project. So yes, originally the portability effort at Google was called Data Liberation. It was called the Data Liberation Front. We've been looking at portability as something that we felt was very important, not specifically for the business as a whole, but simply because we thought it was a good idea. Since over 10 years, we first blogged about it in 2009, and we've got a number of products we've been working on in that space. We actually launched our own takeout product in 2011. And what we see, and remember, we have a very distinct view on this from the users that come to get their Google data. There are two big primary things that they're looking for, and I guess that's representative of the current state of the world of data rather than the future state that a lot of, I did that on purpose, no I didn't, that a lot of you are looking at. But what we see is that users, when they're looking at portability, have generally either want to, believe it or not, just back it up or view it. We get that's the plurality case for us. They actually are worried that their data will get lost, or they want a way to simply look through it. And the other thing, which is the most interesting one for us as we thought about it, was they would like to take their data and go check out another service, either with one particular piece of data or maybe potentially even moving all of their data. And we've always believed that effectively the best product should win. And so we're very active and engaged in finding ways for even us, if we were unhappy with a product, a Google product, making easy ways for users to move their data from Google to other products. The current, actually, this is outdated as of a day ago. We updated this just yesterday a little bit, but just the UI. But there's a single place at Google where right now 50 different products, consumer products, there's other 20 kind of related services and products that users can take and move their data directly to as a download, or move it directly to other services. We also, an important part of this is making sure it's extremely visible to users. We make it available in a number of other places, including a Google dashboard, as well as some in-product instantiations of this so users know how to access it. Because I think availability and discoverability is a challenge for, I think, all of us as people who are working in the portability space, because people don't actually understand that they have not only the right, but also the ability to move their data where they want. And one of the approaches we've taken, and we do a pretty good job of this given existing standards, actually. We're leading the way on making sure that users can get their information in the format that's most relevant for them. This is just one example of the multiple formats we provide, leading into standards, of course, where they're available. The last piece I just wanted to touch on in terms of existing work is that we actually already have the ability to directly transfer information, which is one big challenge because downloading information is only so useful, and being able to move directly to competitors or to other services is something that we thought it was important to support. There's actually one more service we support right now, which is box.net. But the problems that we saw around portability are not things that we felt we could solve simply by creating a single tool in Google. And so a while ago, this is 2017, we started talking about it deeply. We started working with some other folks in industry to create an open source solution to address some of the challenges we saw with data portability. We announced last July with the 4 partners that you see on the screen, and we have been talking with a lot of other individuals and partners as well. So the things that we are focusing on, first of all, we're looking at primarily user data. The system that we built could certainly be used for any number of types of enterprise data as well, but our focus is on the user use case. Privacy and security were critical. We have a white paper that we published that you can access at datatransferproject.dev. We talk about ways to address both privacy and security issues. An important part of this is reciprocity as well. Something that I think other people have touched on a little bit is that it's important that we can trust the destination of the place we're putting the data. And part of that is making sure that we can get data out of the systems where they're going in. And I think the last piece is recognizing there's all different types of data, and we want to be careful to create a system that is aligned with the incentives of the companies that are currently holding that data to make it practical for them to move it. So we want to make sure that we're focused on the user's data and not proprietary algorithmic data that might potentially be exposed. So what is the problem with portability today? Well, at a really high level, if we want to be able to move data from one company to another, independent of some of the solutions that you've all heard here, something like what Digime is looking at, where they would kind of sit in the middle of all that, and similarly with solid InRuPt, just even getting to one of those providers right now, getting to that state, requires, unfortunately, a whole massive web of different adapters and software to be built. We also have a challenge that most folks are mobile, so I don't even know if they could download 500 gigabytes of photos onto their phone, and even if they did, I'm not sure what they would do with it. And the n squared scaling note is simply just an acknowledgement that if Google, for example, we're going to want to try and solve the problem for the whole internet, not only would Google have to build a way of moving every data type to every single other company in the world, Google would also have to build one for every single other company to transfer it to every single other company in the world. So those challenges are very daunting. So as we looked at what an ideal state of portability might look like, first of all, we want to make sure that all companies, large and small, can access this system. We want to make sure it scales so that no company needs to build enough adapters or enough data access points for the entire world, because that would be impossible for any one company to do. And we want to make sure that it enables innovation for any individual company that wants to enter a field and not be subject to a disadvantage simply because they don't have a good starting point in terms of users, so users can bring their data to them. So what is a data transfer project? We said we want to make sure we're being practical about this. We want to look at existing technologies where they exist. That means things like OAuth, things like web technologies. We want to try and make sure that companies only have to deal with their own APIs, not the APIs of other companies, because there's a bunch of risks and challenges associated with that. Making sure that companies actually are aligned in their incentives, focusing on their users, making sure that their users are the ones that they're caring for, and focusing again practically on what we can do in an iterative way. What is the first step that we can take right now to try and make the world of portability better, and can move us to a number of the future worlds that we were talking about previously. This is how it looks overall in terms of its function. I won't go too deeply into this, but I just want to acknowledge that there are a few different pieces to this. And because this is an open source project, there's a number of ways they can be swapped in. So for example, in terms of the APIs, it's currently using existing public APIs. There could be extensions to make other APIs available as part of it, but right now it actually just uses existing APIs from companies. The way authentication works can be swapped in for a number of different authentication formats. However, most of the code that we have is working off of OAuth, which is a standard around authentication. In terms of where the service runs, it can run as a fully cloud-operated system, or it can also run as a hosted system out of a server, or even, notably, I think it was about a week after our meeting with the Solid and InRuPt folks, one of our lead engineer, Brian Willard, actually created an adapter so that we could actually make it work to go directly over to Solid and InRuPt as well. And this is actually not only a totally open system in terms of participants, but also in terms of data types. So we are not thinking explicitly about one data type. Our focus right now is on user data, but that's still obviously a very large space. So any company can be involved, large or small. If there is some new data type that we haven't thought of, those data types also can be and easily supported. And it's been very interesting since we announced this last July, the number of other data services or data owners that have come to us talking about challenges they have around data portability. And we're looking for a solution that works for them. Anything from, I think the most interesting one for me has been looking at irrigation data and crop data is something that obviously isn't something that's front of mind for us at Google, but certainly is something we can support as part of the data transfer project. So all this is currently right now available in open source on GitHub. This is an old screenshot, but it looks mostly the same today in that there's a whole bunch of documentation and a whole bunch of work going on. We have currently adapters for a number of different verticals, we call them, or data types. And that things like images would be a data type. Just blobby storage generally, storage of big files. Things like mail and contacts. And recently, an addition of an adapter for social graph data and social network data. We have support for hosted and cloud solutions. We're also, as I mentioned, Solid and InRuPt is available as something that we can transfer into. And we're happily now working beyond simply the key industry players that we started with and some additional ones that have started to contribute, but also individual developers coming from academia, simply coming as individual interested developers and trying to address their particular use cases. We have a number of different working prototypes, and we expect to have some user-facing launches relatively soon, and so we're excited about that. In terms of where we're headed next, a big part of this, and you heard this as well, about, about solid InRuPt, that, we want to get more people involved. We're going to continue to design, we're going to continue to develop additional features to make sure things like, retrying data as it's transferred works really well, to make sure authenticators are working and adaptable to a number of different new formats and new companies that we're engaged with. But also just making sure these launches are actually going out more widely. You might have seen us, we're kind of trying to get more involved in some of the different conferences that are available. The DigiMe folks, for example, we're at My Data as well. We're also, doing where Jesse was just working with some startup incubators last fall, and in addition, discussions with a number of different think tanks. So I think this is actually just a doubled slide from before. I just wanted to acknowledge that we are also looking at more and more data verticals, and we're looking for feedback about verticals that we should support that we hadn't considered, because again, we recognize that we come from a rather myopic view of what the world of data means, because we only know our users and the data that we hold. And so looking to talk to different shaped, different sized companies from different places helps us build a system that can support genuinely any data type to genuinely any other company. And I think that's where it's most interesting for me, the conversation that we have here with Future State, because a lot of the work that's required for us to get to a model where, for example, DigiMe or Solid can get access to the user's data, pull it in a format that makes sense for them. And I think the focus for them has been on some of these really sensitive, hard nuts to crack, like healthcare data, like financial data. Well, there's a vast wealth of information out there. There's a lot of different data types, and not all of them are naturally going to be something that you can build individual support for. So trying to figure out a way for users to be able to move that data into whatever system they like, whether it's a centralized system that does kind of hold it all in one particular place, or maybe allows for a more stepwise move towards that, where we see a few aggregators like DigiMe holding sets of user data. Either way, we think that the system that we've built is something that can support all of those things. We can go through a mock demo, but I think you've seen some similar things from other folks, so I think I'll actually probably hold off on that just in the interest of time.
Hey, Greg, that was terrific. Thank you so much. I think all 4 presentations today have been fascinating. I've certainly learned a tremendous amount. The least interesting thing that I've learned today is that I am terrible at estimating presentation time. So we are kind of iterating on the fly here. And I think instead of trying to do questions from participants in the last 5 minutes, I'm going to let my colleague Priya Vora ask one question, the same question that we'd like all 4 presenters to take a stab at. And Sid, hopefully you're still on the line from India. Why don't we start with Greg, since he's should be unmuted still.
Yeah, so thank you, Kay, and thank you to Pramod, Julian, John, and Greg. These have all been really fascinating conversations, and what's so interesting is to see how people really around the world are trying to tackle this issue of data interoperability. Maybe more than that, that there were common themes today in the presentations about how data interoperability can improve the health of the internet for developers, for users, for organizations. And of course, for us as Future State, we're really interested in the themes that Pramod started with today, this idea that democratizing access to data can create value to even the world's poor. That data is an asset for even the most marginalized people to then unlock new services such as credit or better healthcare or better access to jobs. So it's a really interesting way to think about data as a new tool in the fight against poverty. So these are early days. Everyone seems to also mentioned how early they are in their ventures. So I want to make sure we cover some of the questions that skeptics have, and which is what can go wrong. So maybe, as Kay suggested, I'll start with Greg. Maybe you can give us in 30 seconds your thoughts on what are the biggest barriers or potential barriers in the way of really achieving the impact we hope to see with data interoperability. Is it the notion of over-consent? Is it that the constituents against data interoperability are really too great? Is it a technology concern? What are you most concerned about? Greg, over to you.
Sure. Yeah, I'll comment on some of the first pieces of that, maybe throw it over to Jesse for a comment on the technology challenges. But I think one thing that I liked the way that Julian was talking about the DigiMe approach, acknowledging that while things like consent and authentication are important and great, while things like figuring out, clear laws around this are helpful and valuable, in the end, the real challenge is making the data available to other companies in a way that it's actually useful without too much work. And that's why we've decided to focus in on this area, because we think practically, in order to move to all of the different pieces, it's kind of the first step that needs to happen. Otherwise, everything else won't work. So right now, the biggest challenge is there's a whole bunch of data out there, and nobody knows how to get it. And not only do they not know how to get it, once they get it, they're not sure what to do with it because either the format's wrong or the APIs are unstructured, or there's no shared sense of how things should work. What is a moving photo these days? The Apple has a standard for a photo that moves, and Google has a standard for a photo that moves. What is a social network? Facebook social network is a uniquely shaped one and very different than something like Twitter's social network. And so how do we make these things work in a way that is interoperable, but also doesn't lose a lot of the key interesting information that makes it valuable to us as users? I think that's one of the biggest challenges, and for us, I think the biggest. Is why we're focusing in on it. You want to talk about some of the technical aspects, Jesse?
And I'll just remind you of a 30-second warning here.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yes, thank you, Greg. On the technical side, what we're saying is, the APIs are there; they're available. We work around the data model issues, modeling the different, as Greg just mentioned, the different innovative data approaches that folks are taking, and we can kind of work around that. But what we're seeing is, the scale of this, right? And we have lots of practice at Takeout doing this for all of Google data, but not everyone has that sort of scalability built into their APIs. So we might have to throttle and go very slow for moving from, a smaller photo company over to Google Photos, or from Google Photos, we might be able to export, hundreds of thousands of photos for a particular user, but then they might be going into Instagram, which is designed to only have one photo uploaded at a time, for example. So although the APIs are available, it's the next level of consideration: scalability, recovery, retrying, and then from there, providing the users the right feedback. What things errored out? For what reasons did they error out? Is it just that a moving photo isn't supported by the target service, as Greg mentioned, or is it that there was actually an error? So getting all those nuances of actually moving the data over once it's available, it presents its own set of challenges, and we have to make sure that we're presenting to the user that we're not what we're doing, what didn't work, and that their data is ultimately safe and private and secure.
Thanks, Chewy. Sid, can we put you on the spot to answer next in 30 seconds?
Yeah, so from our perspective, I think the biggest challenge is the operationalization of the adaptive modules that have to be implemented by each data provider.
Sid, we can't hear you very well.
Hello, can you hear me?
That's a little better.
Hello, yeah. So the biggest challenge we see is the operationalization of the implementation of the adaptive modules by each data provider. More so given that we're looking at regulated data sets. So this is data provided by a bank or hospital, and broadly the biggest challenge that we see right now. Of course, so as the system matures, then one has to deal with over-consenting.
Sid, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we just can't understand you. I think there's too much background noise. So I'll give you a minute to see if you can go somewhere more quiet, and we will move on to Julian.
Hi. Well, I'm going to slightly disagree with Greg, because actually, although, Greg, this may sound a little odd, having brought forward our normalization tech from the military and stuff, many of some of those challenges that you're talking about can be addressed, and in fact are, because of we've brought health and some other stuff together. Doesn't mean to say it isn't a lot of work there. So I'm not so worried about the technical side, because we can see that that has and is being solved. I'm more worried about what stops this coming forwards is actually a focus on the wrong thing. And so if we look at the privacy and security debate, it is unfortunately focused purely on that and not focused on the upside, the ability to do more with an architecture where the individual is in control. Because when you focus on the upside, you can see what can happen. So whether that's Solid, ourselves, India, with the data transfer project providing data, and we're all the same in that sense, all trying to do it. If we can get more focus on that, then the use will be pulled more quickly, and you'll see the consumer then understanding, because it's not something the consumer has to be learnt, it's through behavior, through the actual new apps that will show everybody the values. So for me, it's actually a missed dialogue. The dialogue is too much on the negative side of things and not on the, if we move the architecture, all the positives that will come, and therefore that would drive a faster pace of change.
Great, thanks, Julian. John?
Yeah, hey there. Well, yeah, you know, challenges. Well, I don't know that it's the constituents that are already in place in opposition, because as Greg pointed to, you know, we've got a very enthusiastic and accommodating reception from Google and similar. So I think that everybody understands this change required. I don't think it's going to be about the technology. Well, you know, the world's got a bunch of smart people in it. We can figure stuff out. We always have. I'm sure we always will. So I don't think technology is going to be a change. I think what it's going to come down to is the network effect. Can developers create applications in this new world that users will consider to be valuable to them? And can they do it in such a way where it'll drive adoption and the flywheel effect will kick in? And to fuel all of that, the underpinnings of it, hence InRuPt somewhat, not to do a little sales pitch on InRuPt, but the reason Tim and I started it is we believe that commercialization is going to fuel it. That if we can build a beneficent world where it's not about taking advantage of your customers, but giving them value for fair return, then you know, developers will build fabulous applications, organizations will want to treat their customers somewhat differently, and users will enjoy a world where they've got innovative apps, great relationships with their vendors and or organizations that service them, and the whole thing will go move in a very, very, we think, accelerated fashion, actually, to a better place. So I think the network effect is the biggest challenge we got.
Okay, great. Should we let Sid take one last stab at closing us out?
If we step back, I think the vision of the data empowerment and protection architecture is how do we ensure over 1 billion plus Indians are given control of their data and have the ability to, in an informed, consented manner, share their data to access better services, be it financial, healthcare, or otherwise. If you break that down, the biggest concern would be the market ecosystem of data access fiduciaries, and essentially how do we design the right set of incentives which ensures that these data access fiduciaries actually penetrate the hinterlands of India and create the diverse set of informed consent experiences, because based on some of our past experience and learnings of the other large-scale platforms, what tends to happen in India is a lot of the internet companies, for example, focus on the upper pyramid of about 65 to 100 million Indians, right? And therefore, how do we, if I had to reflect back on what the biggest concern would be, it would be how do we ensure the data access fiduciaries and a diverse set of them start looking at different segments of India and over a period of time cover 1 billion plus Indians. So yeah.
So this has been a really fascinating discussion. I wish we had more time for the Q&A conversation part of this. What we are going to do next is put the recording of this webinar up on our website. We will send a link to that as well as to all the presentations that were delivered here today to everyone that registered for the webinar, and let you guys know about the next step in this conversation. But I know we're a little over time, so thanks everyone for sticking with us, and thanks especially to our presenters. Hope everyone has a great evening or rest of your day.
Have a great day. See you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks very much.